Okay, welcome everybody to the Happy Cynics. Today we're going to delve into an interesting topic that's been on everybody's minds here recently, and that's artificial intelligence. This is something that we've come to face squarely in higher education because of things like, chat box, GPT, and all this different AI technology for not only now paraphrasing, writing for students, but even generating ideas, writing essays. So we want to kind of get into this a little bit and talk about, okay, so what is AI able to do? Or what are the current dangers? A lot of us are afraid because we don't know what could happen to some extent. And a lot of this and the type of programs and algorithms that are being used, I don't know how much the average person really understands how this stuff operates. And I'm not even sure to what extent I understand the types of algorithms and programs that they're using. But from what I've read, I think I've got a fairly good idea here, just for us to have kind of a cursory discussion. This is not intended to be technically correct in the sense like we may do this on a future episode. Like if we want to go into a little more deeply about the technology, what possibilities there are, both for good and for bad things, positive and negative ways for the technology to be used. But we just want to kind of, at least at this point in time, talk about just kind of AI and where we are as a society and how this is already starting to affect people's daily lives. So, what are your impressions about AI, Isaac?
Well, I was wondering, have you had students turn in AI written papers? Have you caught anybody in that?
Not yet, but that remains to be seen. I was tempted to, I forgot I was going to, maybe I still should. I think I probably will. Like there's a class where I'm going to have students write reflection papers. And I think what I'm going to do is hand out pieces of paper in class and have them write a couple paragraphs, like one or two paragraphs in person, just with paper, pencil or paper, pencil or pen on paper, and write live. And then I'll have like a baseline against which to judge the essays they turn in for grading.
Yeah, so you can get an idea of their voice.
Right. So, if somebody turns in something, originally that, is on the 8th grade level, and then all of a sudden their graded essay looks, like it was written by Ernest Hemingway or somebody, well, that's going to be kind of a tip off. So.
Yeah, one of the sources I actually looked at when preparing for this was like the question of, can AI do philosophy? And they ran, some tests with different AI machines and determined that no, AI is terrible at philosophy. It can't do it because AI is kind of built on the on just like pure math and pattern recognition.
Mm-hmm.
And AI like has a hard time dealing with novel questions and concepts because it doesn't have any of the pattern recognition to fall back on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's terrible at novel concepts, and philosophy is almost exclusively novel concepts. So
yeah, so I don't want to make this too technical or esoteric, but part of the issue is whether or like how likely is it that AI is going to develop what we would call emergent properties? Okay. So for those of you unfamiliar with this kind of terminology, this is even discussed, say, like and discussed in evolution. So like what makes human reasoning different from animal reasoning? So I'll just use that as an analogy because I think that would kind of serve to illustrate kind of what I have in mind here. I know for centuries, a lot of people believed that human thinking was just a completely different type of thing from animal reasoning. People used to say, well, humans are the only ones with self-awareness, that we're aware of ourselves and we, have some kind of we're conscious of what's going on. Like we can immediately respond to our environment and even our own existence, even our own thought. Well, we found that that's not exactly true. Like the philosopher Descartes, a lot of people don't know this, but like the philosopher Descartes, he assumed that because he believed that animals didn't have souls, that they couldn't really experience pleasure or pain the way the humans do. And unfortunately, some of Descartes' later students ended up dissecting live dogs because, after all, whenever the dogs were crying and whimpering in pain, that was nothing more than just a mechanistic reaction. Like they just viewed it as though it was just kind of like reflex and machinery. We know that animals can experience pleasure and pain, but not to the level of complexity that we do. For centuries, people used to say, well, human beings are the only creatures on earth that have language. But we know that that's not true. It's just that different species of animals have sounds that communicate certain concepts, or like even like birds have mating calls, or they have a different sound that they'll make to warn of danger that's near. There are some animals that have signals that when they find food, they're signaling others that there's food to be found. I mean, there's different things like this that we now can study and observe, but yet human reasoning has what we would call emergent properties. Okay, so like one of these would be human beings are able to think recursively. Okay, so this is part of self-awareness. Okay, so, all right, I can say, I know that I'm thinking right now. Well, then I can say, well, I'm thinking about the fact that I am thinking now. And then you could say, I'm thinking about the fact that I was just thinking about the fact that I was thinking just now. And now there's obviously going to be a limit to that. But that's what we would call, say, like in computer programming, like recursion. So it's like a loop within a loop. Okay? So that's one part of like computer programming that really would, like the question is, at what point would computer programs be able to develop this kind of recursion and kind of close the circle to where they just become self-sustaining and self-generating?
So are you kind of pointing at like the existence of like mirror neurons at the like
okay, say more about that. Explain
the physical level of consciousness being the self-referential loop that is like we found it in the brain in terms of the existence of mirror neurons and those sort of like base level conscious loops.
Well,
is that sort of what you're referring to here?
Well, yes. So the question is, could there be in software, like something that would develop into a functional equivalent to that? You know, when you think about the evolution of thought, just from the evolution of life, I mean, it's all it all ultimately is going to go back to chemistry and chemical properties. It's just like there need to be amino acid chains, and then you have to have, so the life that evolved on this planet has to do with the exchange of carbon dioxide and oxygen predominantly. And that's why water is such an important element necessary for sustaining life, because water is I guess the primary substance that enables that metabolizing to take place. This is a little beyond my realm of expertise, but I think what I'm saying is basically right. But what I'm trying to say is we are thinking like the evolution of life and whether or not there's something metaphysical behind it or whatever. I mean, people have historically embraced that there's something metaphysical behind it, because if it is just purely physical, it would be incredibly complex, and probably is. You can't just take a string of proteins and peptides or whatever and put them together and then artificially create life. People are, I guess, eventually maybe we'll figure out how to do that. I don't know.
Yeah, I think to sort of recenter us, because I think we've gotten to the to what I would consider the end of the discussion. I would want to say, like, what I think there's enough ignorance around how AI works that it would be worthwhile to just do a base level exploration of that.
Okay.
So when it comes to general, like the simplest level of AI is mere pattern recognition. So
right.
You can give a computer a series of numbers and it can recognize any patterns that show up in those numbers, right? So a computer can do math.
Right.
If you give it time to learn those patterns, it's not the way like we do math by learning the rules of math, right? That's not how AI works. AI would work by, every time I'm given input 2 plus 2, I'm always told that it equals 4. Therefore, the probability that it's 4 the next time I'm told it's 2 plus 2 is very high. So that's how like a very basic level AI works. Where it starts to I think it becomes interesting is when they started developing neural networks. So I think the first one was like the Alex network or something like that, where you're giving input to a single AI like that. That's just like a pattern recognition model. And let's say you have a layer of input, and then those input layers, which are called neurons, like individual simple pattern recognitions are neurons in AI speak. Those neurons give an output, and that output is fed into another layer that uses that same pattern recognition again on the output from the first layer. And then you stack those together, I think like millions of times in some of these models.
Mm-hmm.
And it ends up with a certain number of options for output. And then the final layer is choosing the most probable of those outputs. So it all boils back down to, though, that like just pure math. So like when you're given AI that's like trained to do image recognition, you'll have neurons that just detect like positive and negative light levels on a pixel in that image. And those will form a layer of neurons that can see like the value of curves in a mathematical sense. And those curves will then be analyzed in terms of like, well, how similar is this curve to the curve of a water bottle, right? And then you'll have different properties that each of these neurons is, like, each of these layers is determined pre-trained to detect. And based on the pattern that it's searching for, it will tell you how probable it is that, like, oh, this image is of a water bottle because it's got these curves and it's symmetrical in this way, and it has this amount of luster to it, and it's got, you know, all these different values which have been baked into the layers beforehand, which give you this is probably a water bottle at the end of it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's like very basic understanding that I have of like how an artificial intelligence works. But it's very, very, I think, very far removed from anything that would be capable of like forming a coherent and consistent sense of identity. That, I think, is like what people are like, you know, that's what the sci-fi movies are about, is like, oh, well, this computer that is just doing math has somehow formed a coherent identity.
Yeah. Okay. So this helps me. Okay. And it may, all right, maybe if I explain what I have in mind and why I was going down the path that I was, maybe this will make more sense. I'm trying to illustrate, like, I'm trying to explain how, okay, the evolution of life on this planet, okay, we are kind of like, we talk about how our brains are hardwired for pattern recognition and such. We don't really know why, okay, like, why would, say, like, certain chemical combinations create life and then others not? Or like, why would life, even higher forms of life, want to preserve themselves? Now, I've read different people just kind of speculate about this. Like, is it the case that there are chemical properties that whenever evolution and random mutations created a certain type of combination of genes and such, that this led to organisms that try to survive? Okay. Why is it that life tries to protect itself? Okay. I think that people are afraid that because computers are able to exhibit behaviors that resemble human behaviors, therefore they must have the same drive to survive. Okay. I watched an interview with, I've watched different interviews on podcasts and things like that. And a lot of people that are sounding the big alarms, it's like they're assuming that computers are going to be like living entities that try to preserve themselves. And it's like, well, they're going to realize that, like, we're an impediment to their survival or whatever. But, like, I don't know that my Dell computer is anywhere close. I mean, obviously there's computers much stronger, but I'm just saying, it's not even in the same ballpark. There's not anything like in that I know of where we've created anything that somehow becomes aware of its own existence and then is committed to its own preservation. Like, I'll give you an illustration. So even like in Star Trek: The Next Generation, where they have the android character, Data, and then his twin brother Lore, you know, Data, as a machine, there were episodes where he basically instructed them to shut him down because he considered himself then a threat to the other human beings. But see, that was all put into him by his designer. All right. Like, I think that people assume that because we as living beings have a natural drive for self-preservation, that somehow even an artificial intelligence or artificial life, if we want to call it that, is going to have that same self-preservation instinct. And I don't really see the connection of that at this point. That's what I'm trying to get at. Now, maybe I'm jumping into something else, like other than the direction you were wanting to go with this discussion.
This is definitely the direction I was anticipating. So I think part of it is that if these neural networks could advance to the point of projecting a coherent self-identity, that would, I think, force us to confront the idea that maybe we are just the same thing. Like, that we are just a bunch of layers of neurons that have been trained to do pattern recognition, and that all life is purely material. Because if what makes us human can be exemplified in a machine, then what we are is little more than that. And I think that's what most people are worried about.
Well, that could be. I'm sure that there, I mean, I would guarantee there are people that don't want to see like a reductionistic view of what it means to be human. I mean, throughout our history, okay, like just like pleasure, we can't define really what is pleasure other than just knowing that the brain reinforces certain behaviors because it's like the brain reinforcing itself. This is the part of philosophy and religion. Like people, like historically, have always viewed like pleasure as something metaphysical. That's what leads us to choose things. Okay, we choose based on pleasure, but is that some kind of like, say, programming down in our genetics and biology? I don't know. Would a computer ever have anything that would resemble something like pleasure? Like, in other words, reinforcing. Now, I can't see how that would be possible just for it to develop on its own, unless some programmer programmed a computer to do that.
I think that brings us to an interesting question, though, of what role does desire have in terms of our persistent identity? Because it seems to me that desire arises out of a sense of like absence within the self. And this, we might be treading into some pretty deep waters here. But that if an AI model, a machine, could achieve a persistent identity, that it would have to be accompanied by the existence of desire. That desire is a consequence of the self, and I think it's inevitable.
Desire's definitely there. I hear what you're saying about identity. I'm not sure. Let's put it this way. I think even like simpler organisms and animals have desire. I'm not sure they have identity. I don't know. Maybe they do. Like, give you an example. Okay. I was getting ready to shave the other day, and I started turning on the water. I didn't even realize, but there was like one of those like house centipedes in the sink, and the water hit it, and it ended up going down the drain. I probably would have just grabbed it with a tissue and killed it or something anyway. But as soon as the water hit it, it instinctively was like flailing its legs, trying to keep from getting washed away with the, I don't know if that would qualify as desire, but in other words, it's some kind of predisposition to act or choose in a certain way. That's how, just for the sake of this discussion, I'm going to define desire. I don't want to like get hung up on the semantics of that. But what I'm saying is I don't see how computer programming is anywhere near where a computer program is going to develop that inclination on its own. It's only going to get that from a programmer. This is why even for centuries, I mean, even the deists believed that there must be a creator, because like they couldn't understand, like even after the time of Darwin, there are still people that think there's no way to account for why organisms would want to survive or choose or have any kind of predispositions unless there's some kind of a higher intelligence that's putting that telos in there. Telos is the Greek word for goal, ladies and gentlemen, like a goal or an end. Like, in other words, we are driven by, like, this is what desire is. We have this, this inclination towards certain things. I don't know how we exactly define what pleasure is, but pleasure is kind of the feeling that keeps us choosing certain things. And I guess we could probably, and maybe this is a separate episode, and maybe that one's a lot more philosophical. I just don't see where that kind of property is going to, at least right now, with computer programming the way it is, I just don't see how that gets there. So I'll use another cinematic reference here. So even in the Terminator movies, okay, it's not like the Arnold Schwarzenegger Terminator character. It's not like he just decided on his own that he's going to go back in time and protect, what was the kid's name? John something or other. I can't remember what his name was in the Terminator movies. But he was programmed by that kid whenever he was older to do that. The danger, like people are saying, oh, you know, the computers, they know that like they're going to see us as a threat, and then we're going to be like bugs to them, and then they're going to exterminate us. Well, I don't yet see anything. I don't see how the connection is going to be. Maybe I'm ignorant about how this programming works, but I don't see anything where programs are going to do anything other than what they've been programmed to do. And so if you want to go back into like the point you were making, that we can do that. I, at some point, want to come back to talking about the use of language, because I think that's what's giving a lot of people fear, because you hear, what is it? Lexa, or what's the name of these virtual
Siri,
yeah, right. And you hear them talking to you, and it gives you the feeling that you're talking to somebody, but you're not really talking to anybody. Like, the voice is simulated. Even the choices are just from like very complex algorithms that are choosing from words. It's just kind of like, it would be like a 3-year-old with an IQ of 5,000 or something. Like you would just simply be choosing based on like patterns. It's not like the computer's like, okay, what would be a good response or whatever, because the computer doesn't have any desire. The computer is what I would say value free. Maybe that's a better way to think about it. I tend to think about this, and what's driving my thinking, Isaac, here is me as an ethicist, because all ethics comes down to values, and I just don't see how computer programs or artificial intelligence is anywhere near to having its own values.
Yeah, so as a little bit of a rebuttal, I would argue that when people are worried about self-conscious machines, because I think that's a little bit more of an accurate term than artificial intelligence.
Right.
That the desire for, let's just say, self-preservation,
right,
is inherent in possession of an identity.
I don't know if I would buy that. Go ahead. Let me listen to your argument all the way through.
I don't know if I buy it either. So I'm on the page with you there, but I think the difficulty is, see, I would almost say almost the opposite, that when it starts coming down to not just consciousness but self-consciousness, one of the litmus tests for that, if not the litmus test for that, is the death drive. The self-inflicted urge to stop existing.
Right.
That, I think, would be truly terrifying if a machine demonstrated.
Well, yeah. Yeah. I mean, how much of Star Trek Next Generation have you ever watched? Not
what
much.
Have you shown in class?
Okay. Do you remember, did I show clips of that episode where the Professor Moriarty character gets self-awareness from the holodeck? And then
yes. Yeah.
Okay, he wants to leave the holodeck. See, there's so many loops in that plot. Like, how could a character created by the ship's computer have self-awareness without the ship's computer itself having self-awareness? That's one thing. That's a separate issue. But
yeah, well, I mean, how does the universe have self-conscious beings within it without being self-conscious itself?
Yeah, but it's not as though like we are constantly being generated by the rest of like our thought is being generated by the rest of the universe. Now, if it were the case that my thoughts were actually just a reflection of some other kind of thought in the universe, then I think that would be right. But like, yeah, we owe our origin and our our matter to the universe, but the properties of that matter come from the combination of matter that we have, not so much from, it's not the matter itself, but it has to do with the combinations of matter that we have. Does that make sense? So I
would push back against that slightly, and say that it is not necessarily what we are or what we have that makes us self-conscious. It is the lack within, which is I think is the generator of desire.
Yes. Okay. So that was John Locke's view in his essay concerning human understanding. And this was one of the things that created, like, really ruffled a lot of feathers of like Christian theologians. I don't want to get us off topic here, but this is like, I think it still is on point. Locke argued that all of our choice originates in lack, because you only choose something that you have an inclination toward that you don't already have. Well, theologians didn't like that, because going back to the scholastic thinkers, they had this view that because God's perfect, God doesn't lack anything. Well, then if Locke is right, then if you had a perfect infinite being, that being would never have any reason to make any choices.
Well, yeah, I think John Locke is right. And I think I would find it extremely difficult to read the New Testament in the scholastic way and come away with a God who has no lacks.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. Well, that's part of what led to the development of like process theology and this, open theism.
Yeah. Well,
okay.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's what a Greek way of thinking about it.
It is. It is. Yeah. Gee whiz. boy.
This is I love this topic because we can go so many different places with it.
Well, I know
It's so open.
It is.
But I'll roadmap us a little bit back here.
Okay.
So I want to go back and start. We mentioned the death drive, or I mentioned the death drive,
right?
And I think that's a fairly new idea for a lot of people.
Okay. Yeah. Say more about that.
I think, it's worth an explanation because I think it's important.
Right.
So in Civilization and Its Discontents, Freud talks about these two drives within humanity. There's Eros, or what he would call like the libidinal drive.
Right.
And when talking about Freud, you have to keep in mind, like, he uses a lot of sexual imagery, but he's not specifically talking about sex.
Mm-hmm.
So Eros is this libidinal drive for life. So existence would be like the basic drive of Eros. And that is what forms and keeps order in societies.
Okay. Right, because
everybody
wants to survive. And so everybody comes together and agrees on, okay, this is what we need to agree to be able to survive. Good. Go ahead. Keep going.
There's a second drive that is counter to Eros. That is the death drive.
Okay.
Which is the desire to return to a pre-conscious state of non-existence. It is that like hearkening back to, well, I didn't have desire before I was conscious, and desire is painful, therefore I desire to return to pre-conscious non-existence.
Mm-hmm. Right. Right.
So that's the death drive, and that expresses itself in behaviors that are self-destructive or antisocial.
Right.
So
right.
When we bringing it back to AI, the possibility of a purely machine entity exhibiting those behaviors would be, I think, the true, like, oh, we have not just artificial intelligence, but artificial consciousness.
Right. We basically have artificial life, or let's say manufactured life. It's a different life form, because then it has at least that desire to preserve itself. Right. And that's what ties into the death drive, right? Is only a being that cares is going to be feel frustration. That's even one of the basic tenets of Buddhism. I mean, not to get us off topic, but see, one of the Four Noble Truths of Buddhism is, the whole thing is that all suffering comes from desire. So the way you overcome suffering is by getting rid of desire. You try to have this detachment. Right. Well, what he's saying is, if computers got to the point where they could have unfulfilled desire, like, in other words, a computer is trying to do something it can't do. Like right now, if you get your computer in an infinite loop, it's not going to blow its stack and then set your house on fire. But if computers ever became aware of their own existence and what they're doing, a computer thrown into an infinite loop may end up taking it out on somebody. I don't know. But that's probably not technically correct, but that's kind of what we're getting at here, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think Buddhism is a really interesting religion from the psychoanalysis perspective, because heaven for Buddha is non-existence. Right? Buddha is essentially a death drive religion. Yeah.
Yeah. It's it's perfect tranquility. Yeah.
Nirvana. So then I think the natural question for me then is, let's assume that it's possible for a neural network to become an artificial consciousness,
Mm-hmm.
what would that process look like? How would that be achieved?
I think it would be possible for somebody to create that. See, and that's honestly, that's one of the things that concerns me. I'm not really concerned that having high power, like that machines having high computing power is necessarily going to create any what I would call emergent properties. But it could be possible that people that understand what those emergent properties are and how they work could program a machine to have those. You could hypothetically write a computer program so that its main goal in choosing is to preserve itself, first of all. That nothing can get away in the way of its execution of its program, of its software.
To kind of revisit the language idea that you were talking about earlier.
Right.
There would have to be, so Lacan talks about the mirror phase, right? Where a child becomes a unified entity for the first time by observing themselves.
Right.
And that results in the symbolic I as a self-identity, that we identify with I through language.
Mm-hmm.
What is it even possible, though, to code language, self-referential language, into a computer without... So, like, we get the mirror phase comes to us through our physical senses, but a computer doesn't have those.
No,
so what medium
no.
would a computer have for the mirror phase as on the road to consciousness?
No, I guess the point I was trying to make is I think it would be possible for somebody to write a program where the program would be written in such a way that the computer would try to stop anybody that would try to end the program. But that would basically, the program would essentially be an extension of the programmer. The computer itself would not have any awareness, but it would still be carrying out that function.
There would have to be, in order to carry out that function, there would have to be some level of agency. That is I think the question is, like, we have the agency of our senses. And, like, what is the self-referential sense, if not in a machine?
I think the programmer would have to anticipate that. And then the way to defeat the program would be to approach the computer in a way that the programmer didn't anticipate.
Have you ever seen
you understand what I'm saying? Like, just like even in the Terminator movies. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, you're good. I was gonna kind of start bringing up another, like, artistic interpretation of this. In Blade Runner.
Okay.
Are you aware of Blade Runner?
I'm aware of it. I've seen bits and pieces. I have not watched the whole thing.
It's not strictly about AI, but it is about artificial humanity.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about these three, they call them replicants. They're essentially like, more human than human is what they call them.
Right.
And these three replicants,
they're kind of like technologically enhanced humans or something, right? Or not?
No, they're strictly artificial.
Oh, okay.
But they are, like, extremely human.
Okay.
Like, you can't tell them apart.
Okay.
And these three replicants are, or maybe it's four, I don't remember. This group of replicants have been programmed to die after 3 years.
Okay.
And they know this. And so they go on this, like, bloody mission to be fixed so that they don't have to die.
Okay.
And the movie's about Harrison Ford's character, Deckard.
Okay.
Hunting these replicants and killing them off one by one until he's eventually bested by the last one on the date of this final replicant's death.
Okay.
And so it's an interesting exploration of what is the real separation between these artificial consciousness beings that are purely machine and can be manipulated and programmed, and the normal humans of the movie.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's a great movie. Highly recommend it if you haven't seen it. It's a little bit tough to watch.
Okay,
though.
at least you piqued my interest. I need to watch. I should watch the rest of that. I may have been confusing that one with Mad Max. Wasn't that the one with Mel Gibson?
I have not seen Mad Max.
I think so. Well, anyway.
Kind of seems like we need to do a Happy Cynics movie.
Yeah,
night.
we need a Happy Cynic Cinema movie or episode. Cinema. Yeah, there we go. Cynicma. Well, let me, okay. I definitely want to take a few minutes here just to talk about some of the things that are being discussed, like even with current technology. I mean, I think we kind of hammered at like, okay, what would really be necessary for like computers to kind of, that's what we were trying to get at, folks. What would be necessary for there to be like computers or cyborgs that are going to gain self-awareness and then see us as a threat and whatever. That's kind of what we were trying to get at. But even with the technology that's being used now, there are some potential, I wouldn't say dangers, but there could be potential problems. I mean, there's a lot of good things that the AI can do. So one of the things, I was reading this paper by Gary Gensler and Lily Bailey from MIT. And Gary Gensler is also chair of the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. And they are talking about the downfalls of using AI to give people, say, financial and investing advice. And they're plugging these algorithms in to use to give people advice on where to invest. And then what ends up happening is the algorithms are giving the same advice to a whole bunch of different people. And then it ends up in clumping, what they call clumping, like an inordinate number of people end up all investing in the same stock. And then it artificially jacks up that stock more than it would from natural market forces.
It's like reverse insider trading.
Exactly. So, that's one example. Like you get, these programs are not going to like, okay, well, I recommended this to one person, I'll recommend something different to somebody else, because after all, it's better if the economy is more diversified and people are investing in different things or whatever. A computer is not, I mean, at least at this point, they haven't put algorithms out there that do this kind of complexity. It's just like everybody knows, if you're on the internet and you get a pop-up ad, and even if you're just intrigued by the picture and you click on it, you're going to start for the next 3 months, start getting ads that all have similar pictures, whether that's something you really care about or want to shop for or not, so you got to be careful what you click, because the algorithm will just kind of hone in on that. And then all of a sudden, every website you go to, they're putting up pop-up ads with stuff that looks very similar to what you clicked on. The computer algorithms are not sophisticated enough to say, maybe he was just interested in the picture, not really in the product or whatever. It's not going to go that far.
So
go ahead.
One of the first thing that I saw when I started researching for this episode was a video by I'll have to put it in the show notes because I can't recall it right now, but it was this journalist, I believe she's a journalist, who tested herself against an AI model that she made with an AI engineer.
Huh.
And they took all these different like intelligence level tests. So they took like the LSAT and they took the Mensa IQ tests, like all these different, and she compared her scores with the AI, and the AI destroyed her when it came to data analysis questions.
Right. Raw crunching of data.
Right. But then when it was given questions like, what is silly about this picture, or what is wrong here, or finish this piece of art, like those kind of novel, like more ambiguous questions, the AI tanked. It was horrible at it.
Yes.
And so I think an interesting question is, how deep does a neural network need to be?
Yeah.
In order to start having enough data that it can adapt to novel situations the way humans can.
Well, and
like it seems to me like
even then, some humans are a lot better at picking up subtleties than other people are.
Well, yeah, and I think that comes with exposure to novel situations.
Right.
But I think a human can get there with far less data than a machine ever could.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like the data set for a machine to really be able to handle novelty is infinite.
Well, okay, but we start learning to read body language, facial expressions, voice inflections from the time we're infants. I mean, so truthfully, we each have years and years of practice at this. I mean, it's not, well, here's the thing. The other part of artificial intelligence that worries people is because they have this kind of recursive learning where the program will keep learning and gathering more and more data and then keep improving on itself to be more efficient. But that's not the same as though it's like developing complexity of thought. There's a difference between how do I want to put this? It's a certain type of complexity, but it doesn't represent like all the different types. It's just one of many types of complexity that exist in human thought. I saw this clip, and I can't remember if it was one of the major news networks, and it was maybe a year or two ago. I can't remember which university it was, whatever. They had these two little robots that they had built, and they gave them just basic programming to keep gathering information and keep improving. They basically created like a little soccer field for them with goals and gave them a ball and told them the goal, like all they programmed them was the goal is to get the ball in the net, and you're only allowed using your feet. Okay. They showed these like, how like they just kind of started fumbling around, but like they just kept getting better and better to where they were actually like doing like moves, kind of like professional soccer players, and doing fakes, and then trying to hook the ball around the opponent and stuff like that. And so like they were like constantly learning as they went. But that's not to say that, all of a sudden, because you got computers that can learn, that your computer can play really good soccer. It doesn't mean it's like going to say, yeah, I should be paid a salary for doing this, or, or something like that.
Right. And I think what I'm sort of tentatively leaning into is that I think human intelligence and that human ability to be like adaptable is a product of consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas for a machine, it would have to be a product of data.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely.
Which I think is a handicap for the machines.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's right. One thing that really I kind of worry about. So like I'm thinking about okay, whenever I was in junior high school, well, when I was in elementary school, they start coming out with digital watches first. And then in junior high school, they were coming out with what they call scientific calculators, the ones that could do square roots and logarithms and the trigonometric functions and things like that. You know, there was a point where here's the thing. I remember, at least when I was in school, like you had to do all this stuff by hand on paper and show you could do it before then they would let you use the calculator. Once you showed you could do it yourself, then you were allowed to use the computer, the calculator. You were allowed to use any calculator after that. So like you had to show you knew how to do sines and cosines and or let's say you knew what they were and you knew how to calculate like the square root of a number to so many places or something like that. And then once you could do that, you could use the calculator. Maybe they don't even require students to do that anymore. And maybe that's not even a needed skill.
Well, in my education, we had to prove that we knew how to do it.
Oh, okay. All right.
But that was also, that was before the era of smartphones. So
that's true. So
my teachers always told me, well, you're not going to have a calculator in your pocket everywhere you go.
Yeah. Well,
as it turns out, I do carry a calculator in my pocket everywhere I go. So
that's true. That's true. Well, so this is part of my concern, and I'm kind of ambivalent about how do I feel about this, because the technology that we develop is good and it's good for us to be able to use it. But at the same time, I really fear that a lot of people will become so dependent on the technology that they can't function without it. And the fact that all this technology, we're not at the point where we have all like solar powered computers and everything, and we could just go out in the middle of nowhere and be able to do all this computing on our own under the radar or whatever. I don't know that that's really feasible. Like if there's a major power grid problem, it's going to cause a lot of problems. That's what the Y2K scare was. That the power grid was going to collapse, and then computer was going to foul everything up.
I think any conversation that addresses AI would be incomplete without acknowledging the real-time today harm that AI does.
Yes.
AI is like a massive consumer of energy and water.
Yes.
Like at a scale that is pretty troubling. And I think a lot of people who are proponents for the use of AI right now do so without really acknowledging just how expensive AI should be to use. That computing power is really expensive and should not be cheap because it requires a lot of resources.
Yeah, I guess they're hoping that we'll create the AI and the AI will figure out a way to recoup those costs or something, doing something else. I don't know.
Well, if you own the AI, it's very profitable.
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
It's profitable because you're getting stuff like human labor on it. Like AI is a lot of upkeep for human labor. And you're getting companies like Google and Nvidia are getting essentially, what's the word I'm looking for? They're getting a deal on their energy and their water consumption.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they're being subsidized. That's the word I was looking for.
Right.
And I don't know what all the details of that are, but when you look at what the cost of AI is in terms of its material consumption, it is pretty staggering. Same thing with Bitcoin.
Well, yes. The question for something like that would be, well, How much hope is there that it'll become more cost efficient over time? It's the same thing, like the same kind of arguments are made like against using electric cars. Because after all, look how much it costs to make the battery and how heavy they are and this and that. Well, if I thought that the batteries were always going to be that heavy and, that we couldn't improve our battery power technology, well, then, yeah, it may not be worth it to try to do it. Maybe we just all cut down and whatever. But I have hope that at some point we'll develop better battery technology. I think they're working on that. It's just like computer storage. Those of us that saw the marketing, the mass, availability of desktop computers, my goodness, we would have never anticipated how exponentially they like amount of storage and everything would just change. It just, I mean, we used to have these big 5.25-inch floppy disks that would only hold like 360K. It's like, I mean, there wasn't much you could put on one of those. You couldn't even like put one, like a good picture or even a song on it. But nevertheless, that's kind of part of it. The other part that I think a lot of people don't think about, AI has the ability to improve life for people, but at the same time, it's also going to create, it's just like the Industrial Revolution, okay? The Industrial Revolution improved the quality of life for a lot of people, but as a result, a lot of people lost their means of living too. Because we develop technology that ends up replacing people. And this is what I told my students. I said, we're in a day and age where you could probably get your diploma without learning a whole lot. You could rely on computers to do your assignments for you, a lot of them. I mean, maybe some professors will make you do stuff in person so that, you have to do it the old-fashioned way to prove you can do it. And maybe that's what we have to do. But, truth of the matter is, if you rely on computers to do all your thinking for you, let's put it this way. I told a colleague, there's a difference between using, say, chatbox what is it, GPT? Using that.
Chat GPT.
Yeah, Chat GPT, not Chatbox. Chatbox is something different in it. Chat GPT. There's a difference between using that to improve your writing versus using that because you don't know how to write or you can't write well. And if you come out, you may have a diploma, but if you can't really do anything, like if you have no skills or knowledge of your own to offer, well, you better find a job selling stuff because that's about the only way you're going to be able to make a living. Anyway, here's the thing, folks. It's just like anything else. We have technology, we have automobiles, but everybody knows, like at least we know now, sometimes it's better just to park your car and walk just for the sake of your own health. And the same thing's going to be true with whatever we do. Don't rely on computers to do everything for you. You have to maintain your own abilities. Use the technology to enhance what you can do, not as a replacement because you really have nothing to offer humanity except to maybe be able to push a couple buttons. And that's just kind of a very vulnerable place to be in going forward. I really don't know what the long-term answers are. With our little grandson, I told some of my students, I'm sounding like a senior citizen now, in certain ways. Getting older now is kind of a relief because I know like some of this stuff, like the problems that may come down the road, like with global warming and things like that, is probably going to happen after I'm gone. But I feel bad for my children and grandchildren. I wish more people would pay attention to this and quit being so selfish and sticking their heads in the sand about the problems that we are potentially creating for our own offspring. And, you know, I don't know that artificial intelligence at this point is at a point where it's going to like become some kind of autonomous threat to humanity. I'm just not convinced that that's like around the corner yet. That's not to say that it wouldn't be possible at some point. But here's the real danger. It's just like all technology. The more the technology is able to do, it's just going to result in a lot of people just being lazier and less healthy and more stupid. I mean, I hate to say it, but that's the truth of the matter. Develop your own abilities, folks. You young people, boys and girls, develop your abilities. And then use those abilities to use the technology. Use the technology as an extension of you, not as a replacement for you. And that's kind of the best advice I can give. Isaac, do you have any kind of final thoughts or advice you would like to throw in there?
Yeah, I mean, I think I really agree with what you're saying, that we too often just allow other things to do our work for us. And I think there are certain things that you have to do the work on your own. And I think this is even true of like a lot of religious folks just don't want to do the thinking for themselves. They just want to be told. And that I think is a shame, because at that level, you're dealing with things that are of universal concern to all of us. So you should care. Yeah, I worry that we, the less that we allow ourselves to do and the more we have done for us, the more I worry that the death drive starts to become more and more tempting. Because what do we even exist for anyway?
That's true. That's true. Well, yeah, drop us a line, send us an email. Hey, we're itching to hear from you about what you'd like to hear us talk about. Even if you have any recommendations of like somebody you would like to hear us interview, would welcome that kind of input too. We just thank you for being a part of our audience and sticking with us. I hope this has been an enjoyable journey for you. I don't know if we have. Hopefully we've given you some things to think about and maybe give you a little fuel for interesting things for discussion with others. If you're feeling cynical, just keep happy. There's more to be happy about than there is to be afraid about. There's a lot of good that can come from this artificial intelligence, but we're going to have to be wise, and we can't, like I say, don't let it replace you. Just learn how to use it and learn how to make it an extension of yourself. We hope you all take care, and we all hope you have a great and happy day. And we look forward to talking to you soon. Bye-bye.